I love to talk to Black folk about family history, because you really get to see sort of what they value in terms of their family lineage. Like most African Americans have some level of white ancestors in their family. You don't hear much talk about it.
No,
they'll claim Native American before they claim European. You know what I'm saying? You know, my mother had good hair. Well, it wasn't because it was Native American. It was because you had some white ancestor, and that's why the hair was straighter than, you know.
But Dr. Kittles, is DNA a hoax, sir?
No, so DNA testing is not a hoax. It's routine genetic technology. When I say routine, I mean you just mentioned it. People are doing it in forensics. They're doing it for paternity testing. So this is all the same technology, and it is at some level what we call empirical, meaning that it's solid science. And if for instance you see a DNA profile at a crime scene, somebody put it there. Okay, that means that profile was there, you found it, and the science proves it. Now, the science doesn't prove if you put it there or somebody else did, but that's a separate discussion. But no, DNA testing is not a hoax. What's funny, we did a study, a bunch of colleagues and myself, we call it the 4-city study. We went to Harlem, New York, Washington, D.C., Cincinnati, Ohio, and Oklahoma City. And we started the study in Oklahoma, where these are all African Americans from these 4 cities. We looked at ancestry and typed ancestry, gave back the results to the individuals who were part of the study. And out of all the cities, the ones who felt that the science wasn't good, or that this was a hoax, were those who were in Oklahoma. And you know why? Because those in Oklahoma, those African Americans in Oklahoma, wanted proof that they were Native American. And so then when the genetics didn't prove or didn't support their folklore or their, you know, how they were raised or whatever, or these ideas that they got about their family, when the DNA did not support that, of course, it became a hoax. This is a hoax. So the way I see it is this: if DNA provides some level of utility in your life, I'm sure you're going to say that you're going to value DNA testing. But if it goes counter to what you think you know, most of the time people come back with, "Oh man, that's nothing, man. That's fake. That's phony. It's a hoax."
If DNA adds value, repeat that statement. If it adds value to
if DNA testing adds value to you, then you're going to say this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You see what I'm saying? So when there's strong utility with the technology, we like it. So for instance, DNA technology for paternity testing, there's strong utility. DNA technology for forensic and crime scenes and getting folks out of jail, there's strong utility. Folks like it. But when you go counter in terms of family history, when the DNA doesn't support what you've been told or how you were raised or what you thought, then all of a sudden DNA technology is a hoax.
You know,
right? I mean, so we had 4 cities of African Americans. The only city who didn't think that DNA had value was the ones in Oklahoma who wanted to use the technology to prove that they were Native American. And then once that support wasn't there, then they said it was a hoax. But everybody else said this was great. They really appreciated it. They valued the DNA technology. But those in Oklahoma didn't, because, as I said, they wanted to have some genetic support for their so-called family history. I'll tell you one thing. When you have a family tree, right? Let's just say you have a family tree, and you have your 4 grandparents up there. One of those grandparents is white, and everybody else is black, right? Those other 3 grandparents are black. You would say that you're 25% European. But when we look at the DNA of those individuals, it's right on, it's spot on, 25% European, based on the family history, based on the family tree. And so that's the cool part, is that, you know, when we supplement or compare the genetic information with the genealogy information, it's pretty much spot on. Now, unless somebody is adopted or something like that, or false paternity, that's a different story. But for the most part, it's spot on. So when we first started looking at Black women, African American women, we were looking mainly at the mitochondrial DNA. Mm-hmm. And mitochondrial DNA is maternally inherited. So, you get it from your mother, her from her mother, her from my mother, all the way back, generation after generation. And so what we found is for many of those mitochondrial DNAs, for African American mitochondrial DNA, these maternally inherited lines, 95% of them went back to Africa, to West Africa. So
hold on. Say that again, Doc. Say that again.
So about 95% of the mitochondrial DNA in African Americans goes back to Africa.
Hold on, Doc. Hold on.
So then when we look at the Black men, right? So these are African American men. We looked at their Y chromosome. We didn't see that same 95%, that very strong signature of West Africa. In fact, among the men with their Y chromosomes, what we found was upwards of 40% of them going to Europe and not to Africa. So they were only 60% of the Y chromosomes in Black men going back to West Africa. Now, some of you are like, wow, that's crazy. But that is the signature of the behavior. That's like the residual genetic signature of the behavior of white men on enslaved African women early in the history, and then the continuation of that after slavery. So white Y chromosome, European Y chromosomes, every generation are coming into the African American population. And it started, during slavery, the period of slavery. And we see it. We call it sex bias gene flow, meaning that the direction of genes from Europeans is coming from men more so than women. Okay. So we're getting, in terms of European genes, the contribution coming more so from European men into our population than European women. Now, I'm not saying that there's no European women coming in, because, you just think about it. I mean, especially lately, there's been a lot of brothers with white women, but that's a separate story. The mitochondrial DNA, we don't see that signature like we see with the Y chromosome.
What about the Native American blood? Typically in Black families, you hear, my grandfather was Blackfoot or Cherokee. I got Native American blood in my family. When you analyzed or examined the DNA of African American people, did you find a substantial amount of Native American ancestry in our DNA?
Not really. No, not as much as people say. I mean, folks love to say my mama got good hair and I got this Native American. We don't see it that much. I mean, in fact, it's, in the African American population in different communities, like for instance, in that 4-city study we did, I think the highest percent Native American was in New York, in Harlem. And a lot of that was driven by Dominicans. Okay. And so, we don't see that much, and the highest, I think at that point was like 10%, 11%. Normally it's 6% or less across the board. So, yeah, I don't know, but, I know why. I mean, we would, as a community, we would claim Native American before European because of the experience that we've had, as the experiences here in America. And so that is one of the reasons why we end up saying that, and we perpetuate this over and over. And people got these pictures. Oh, look at my auntie, look at my grandmother, look at her high cheekbones. High cheekbones are in West Africa too. The Igbo people in Nigeria have high.
Come on, teach, Doc, teach.
And hair, straight hair.
Were the Aborigines in America, the Native Americans, were they African people? Because I've been battling with folks, Dr. Kittles, online. They're like, the Aborigines were African. The Olmecs were African. The Mayans were African. The Aztecs were African. The mound builders were African. It was Africans or the Aborigines, So, Doc, and I see you smiling. You're chuckling over it. So, yeah. Doc, look. So that's what I've been hearing. And so, Doc, please tell me where, with your findings, when you analyze the DNA of the Native American people, right here, are they sub-Saharan African people?
No, they're not. They're of Asian ancestry.
Hold on, Doc. Hold on, Doc. Hold
The
on.
Aborigines, the Native Americans are of Asian ancestry.
Hold on, Doc. Hold on, Doc. Hold on. Just hold on.
If you're a student of science, right? Anthropology and genetics and all of that, all the evidence supports this migration out of East Asia across the Bering Straits into North America and then into Central and South America. And all of that stuff, there's artifacts, there's history, there's linguistics, language, and there's DNA, all of which show this migration or movement of people out of Asia into the New World. But I think what happened is, we had a couple of scholars who, these are great African American scholars who wrote some really good pieces. And for the most part, they should be viewed as hypotheses, not fact, right? And so they came before Columbus. This whole issue of the Olmecs and the Aztec being of African ancestry. I mean, those are interesting stories, but there's no proof to that. And also, to be honest with you, it's very disrespectful. It's very disrespectful to the Native American brothers and sisters for us to claim that they are of African ancestry. They know their history. And that's like somebody saying to us and trying to reshape or reinvent our history. We would get upset.
Absolutely.
So I don't play that with some of these cats because they, I hear this debate all the time. And it's very disrespectful to Native Americans when you start talking about they are, them and their family history and all of that they are of African descent. Humanity, everybody's from Africa. It's all relative in terms of when we left, but in terms of how Native Americans got to the New World, they came from Asia.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Kittles, that it is disrespectful.
It is.
It's
disrespectful to Native Americans and the Black folk.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, absolutely. So, you got folks, I'm telling you, it's a huge movement online, Doc, the Aboriginal movement, where you got folks, running around here claiming to be Native Americans and claiming to be the Aborigines. And I agree with you. It is disrespectful to the Native Americans and also to our sub-Saharan African ancestors. Right. It absolutely is.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
I couldn't agree with you more, Doc. So Doc, what were your findings when you analyzed the DNA of other people? So, for example, when you looked at the DNA of Europeans, Asians.
The Latinos are interesting because, they're just as diverse as African Americans, if not more. They have Spanish European ancestry, Native American genetic ancestry, and then in some cases, West African, depending on where, if it's the islands of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, some parts of Colombia, Chile, that have been contributing to the transatlantic slave trade. So they have a history, and so we see it reflected in their genomes. And that's why I said Hispanics are just as diverse, if not more, than African Americans, because they have three major proportions. Many Latino communities have a high proportion of Native American ancestry, especially like in Mexico and in Central America.
Absolutely. And I'm sitting here thinking about that history when the Spaniards came over and and conquered and colonized, like you said, down in the Mesoamerica and in South America. So like you said, the DNA is telling us this story.
Right.
It's validating the history, Dr. Kittles. So absolutely.